It's a Rolex, it's a Submariner, it was made in 1980 and it is beating strongly underwater. Let's take a look at this Rolex 16800. And here is the watch in the morning sun. And the thing about vintage Rolex is that when it's been properly serviced, and I'm going to show you a complete service of this watch in this video, it is not only a very beautiful piece, but it is functional, resilient, and really, really cool.
Spend a little bit of time on this because, you know, this is the heart of the watch, the thing that powers the whole watch. So everything kind of starts with this, and it wants to be immaculate. Spring, let's see, it's going to spring out. Pushing that down in there now and locking it out. Okay, so what we've got to do now is, as I say, we're going to let out the air really carefully, under control. It's sometimes a little bit tricky to do that, and what we're looking for is any significant amount of bubbles in a sustained way. You might now, it is not just a service that we have to do with this watch. The bezel isn't working properly. It's really, really stiff to turn, and it kind of turns both ways, so you can't turn it at all at the moment. Actually, it is very, very stiff. The bezel has had a little bit of damage at some point. If you look here, there is a gouge literally scraped out of the bezel, as if it's, you know, been hit by something extremely hard or dragged down the road. Maybe it was being worn by a motorcyclist or something that came off, but there was a lot of force that did that. I suspect, therefore, that when that happened, the bezel insert was trashed as well. So there's probably a replacement bezel insert on there, because I can't see how that would happen without doing, because this part of the bezel is a lot stronger than this, the bezel insert, so can't see how that would happen without damage there. So we've got to fix the bezel. There is also something going on with the keyless works, because when you wind it, you can hear this like little graunching sound every so often. Yeah, it just slips. I don't know if you can hear that. Yeah, that little the clutch is slipping on the winding pinion. Okay, so we have the watch now on the time grapher, and this is the trace that it is giving us in this position. In fact, let me just put it properly dial up. Okay, so we're in the dial up position now. So, quick tip, when you get to this point in taking a Rolex case back off with a tool like this, do not just keep turning the handle. What you want to do as well is just grip the die at the bottom here so that it doesn't turn, and so that it locates straight down on to the surface of the case back. And that way you're not going to put any wear on the teeth on the case back, and it's going to be nice and firm. There's actually a little spring here that you can see that facilitates that action. Okay, so that's just a little tip when you're taking off these Rolex case backs. And then you're going to need a little lever here to get in and just lever case back off like that. Okay guys, when you're taking the case back off a Rolex, don't use any other tool other than one that looks like this, because you know you're going to do some damage to the case back, and that is not a really good place to be. That spring is still keeping tension on the case back because we compressed it when we turned it down. Okay, she's going to come off by hand in a minute now, so I will just proceed with that. And there is the very lovely Rolex 3035 movement. So we are going to take the stem out now and release the movement from the case. And so we have the movement now removed from the case. So the next thing that we're going to do is pop the stem in, rearrange the hands and stop the movement, and remove the hands and then remove the dial. So I'm going to do that now. I just want to talk about the tritium that's on this dial. It looks to be in really good nick, but I do have some strange, and when you come in closer you can see it here, some strange white dust on the dial. It's very difficult to see through the crystal, and in fact when I look at it on the desk here I can hardly see it. It looks just black, but the camera really picks it up. So I am going to assume for safety's sake that that is degraded tritium. So I just need to go and blow that away outside. It's not the most hideous stuff in the world. It has a half-life of about 12 years, but it is radioactive, and it's not the sort of thing that I want on my bench and me snorting it up my nose particularly. So yeah, let's go and do that now. Just before I take the hands off, I'd just like to have a little look on how the hand stack is fitted to the watch before I do that, so that when I put it back together I've got an idea. And on this particular watch, the hour hand does look to be riding a little bit high actually. I think it could sit down a bit closer to the dial than that, but apart from that, that looks good. So let's take the hands off. And here is the movement out of the case and running away nicely there. The next thing that I'm going to do is just remove the balance, because that is of course the most delicate part of the mechanism, and I like to just remove that and put it somewhere safe whilst I work on the watch. Now we're not very far on in this service, but we're already starting to accrue some components on the bench. We've got the case there, and I say components, that's an assembly really. There are quite a lot of parts on that case. We have the case back there, we have the three hands, we have the dial. You'll notice that I have put the dial inside a small plastic container. Guys, the dial contains a lot of the character of the watch, and whilst we hope and try to make sure that we don't do things like drop screwdrivers and all the rest of it as we're working, that can happen, and you need to make sure that the dial is safe from harm. So I always pop it in a little plastic container like that. Likewise, the balance, because the balance is, as I've said, the most delicate part of the watch, and that is under a glass cover there on the bench. As I work on the watch now, most of the other parts I will just lay out on the bench, and I like to do that as calmly but swiftly as possible, so that we don't have parts laying around and gathering dust on the bench. They go through the cleaner, and then we pop them back very carefully and methodically back together again. And you can see by turning the stem, we turn that wheel, and with its little knobble at the end of it, that is a technical watchmaking term, little knobble. And on the other side of the movement here, so this is clearly the component that is driving the wheel around, as you can see, and the component that clicks it into place is the calendar wheel jump spring here, and this is the end of the jump spring here. So if you just watch that, as the wheel is pushed round, it's pushed over, and then it clicks into place like that. Okay, so that's what occurs at midnight, and it's nice and crisp, as you can see. Okay, I mean, as I say, that's what occurs at midnight. This is the rapid date change, so you don't have to wind the watch round for it to invoke. Okay, let's move on. Okay, this is the underside of the advancing wheel. You can see the cam there that is used to help push over the date wheel at midnight, and as you can see from the movement, we can see that the component that pushes against there is the yoke, and it is that long lever with the jewel at the end of it, which is at the center of the frame there. And that's just an example of, you know, the lengths that Rolex go to make sure that everything happens nice and smoothly, because that's a beautiful jewel, and that is butting up against the cam on the bottom of this advancing wheel, which we've just taken off. So, you know, another example here of just how good. Let's get in close on that jewel. Hang on. Yeah, look at that. Look at the way that fits on there and the colour of it. That is absolutely gorgeous. Right, let's get the rest of these calendar works off. And this is a close-up of the advancing wheel cam yoke, where it pivots at the edge of the movement. And I'm just showing it to you so that you can see the dried lubricant that is in there. And that's, of course, why we do this service. You know, when this watch was put together, somebody quite properly put some nice lubricant in there, but it might have been 30 years since this has been serviced, and it's travelled outside of the post there where it fits, and it's kind of sticking all around the end of that arm, which, you know, is not going to help the performance of that at all. Okay, so let's move on. Now, if you saw my video where I introduced this watch, I played a little trick and pretended to put it in the sea, which would, of course, been a little bit reckless, because, you know, we do not know how long since this watch was serviced, and we need to change all the seals before we would even contemplate doing anything like that. So there are three which we need to change. Let's just point these out. This O-ring here, this has a diameter of 32.5 millimeters for this particular reference. So I've ordered a new one of those. There is also this seal here, this O-ring on the pendant tube, and that one looks particularly worn. I'm not sure that would be effective anymore. And there is one also inside the crown. There is a crown gasket as well. So we're going to change all of those three. Let's just come in there to look at this. As you can see, it's all a bit dirty and ragged. In fact, I'm going to come in nice and close with a special lens now to show you this. Okay, and getting in really nice and close now, you can see that there is some pretty deep damage to that pendant tube O-ring there, so that's definitely got to be replaced. And if you can look also and see just how much dirt and gunk there is in the thread itself, which is which bizarrely actually might even be helping the inhibition of water getting into it, acting a bit like PTFE tape, but it's not the way, guys, that it should happen. So we are now, or I rather, am going to look at that is gunking on there. Get all this off, clean it all down, get it through the ultrasonic cleaner, and get new gaskets on it. And just tracking across there, you can see the O-ring there at much higher resolution. And also you can see, you know, the gunk that is there. That'll be all sorts of stuff. When I put the new O-ring in, I will put a little bit of silicone sealant on it. Very, very small amounts, but just helps it seat in nicely. And this is a close-up of the crown gasket, which, as you can see, is looking a bit worse for wear as well, and is totally gunked up. So we'll be replacing that as well as part of the service, so that when we've changed all the gaskets, we can put the case into the pressure tester and make sure that the Submariner, albeit a 1980 Submariner, is still a Submariner. So let's push on. Okay, so now turning our attention to that little issue he had with the keyless works. Now, if you remember, when we were in the first position with the crown, that's the position when we've just wound it off the tube. So we've unscrewed the crown. And what we should be able to do there is wind the watch. And what you can see me doing here is the motion of winding the watch. And you'll notice that there is no slippage. But then we wouldn't expect any slippage here, because the winding pinion, which is this component here, this one, that is not under any tension. So it's not pushing back at all on the clutch, which is this one. And what we found when we had the watch together was that this and this were slipping against each other. Now what's interesting is neither of these components have any broken teeth or seem to have so much wear that they wouldn't work. The only thing that I noticed about this whole assembly is the fact that the stem itself is a little bit, there's a little bit perhaps too much movement there, if you can see that. So it may be that we need to actually replace the stem rather than these two components, and that will be good news, because the stem is a lot cheaper than a clutch or a winding pinion on a Rolex 3035. Anyway, now when you're doing a full service of any watch, you need to concentrate on the balance, because that is, you know, obviously a very, very key component, and you do need to properly clean out the end stones on both the top and bottom pivots. So this is what I'm doing now. I've just released the jewel for the bottom of the balance pivot there, and I'm going to give that a nice clean out. There are actually two parts to this. You've got the end stone at the top, which you can see has got that kind of chamfer on it, and then there's the jewel with the hole in, and that's actually inserted in to the shock mechanism, the anti-shock mechanism that you can see there. So, you know, quite high magnification here. But guys, you know, if you are doing a service of this watch, do not be tempted to skip this bit, because it's when you get this bit right that you get your high amplitude back. So let's move on. And this is the mainspring, which the original mainspring, which I expected to see, you know, a lot in a lot worse shape than it is. Quite often when you break these open, there's a lot of, you know, dried up grease and stuff, but this is actually not looking too bad. But the amplitude was low, and there is no obvious sort of gumming up of this mainspring, which leads me to think that the mainspring itself, after, you know, 40 years or something, is starting to, you know, give up the ghost. So I have procured a new mainspring for this watch, which should help us get the amplitude back up. And if I just come out now, you can see all the other parts that I've got for this watch. There is the new tension ring there. There is the new bezel clip in there. We just touched that. That's the mainspring. There is the new stem. There are the new crown washers, the back case gasket, and the pendant tube gasket as well. So, you know, doing a proper full service to get this watch back so that it is, you know, properly a Submariner again requires all of these pieces as part of the service. So there we are. Let us now clean out this mainspring barrel. The rest of the watch has already been through the ultrasonic cleaner and is ready for reassembly there. So just gonna clean this little chap out by hand and insert the new spring, and then we are ready to reassemble the watch. Okay, so quick update on what I was just saying about the main spring barrel there. As you can see, once I got the spring out and had a little dig around inside, look at all this black, really nasty black dried old lubricant that is in here. So, you know, again, this is why we do the service, to get all of this horrible gunk out. So all this horrible gunk comes out, we give it a nice clean, but a tiny little bit of modern grease in there, specifically designed for this purpose, and pop a brand new mainspring in, and that should give the powertrain, you know, a nice good amount of power to give the movement some good amplitude. So yeah, it's nice to get all this horrid stuff out of a beautiful old Rolex Submariner. And there is the mainspring done there. I've just popped it on top of the movement, which has also just come out of the ultrasonic cleaner. But as you can see, you know, we've got a really nice, sparklingly clean barrel, and the lid has also been cleaned thoroughly, and a brand new mainspring placed inside it. So yeah, I recommend, guys, that you spend a little bit of time on this, because, you know, this is the heart of the watch, the thing that powers the whole movement. So, you know, everything kind of starts with this, and it wants to be immaculate in any watch, but, you know, in a beautiful old Submariner like this, it wants to be really immaculate. And guys, there is the barrel put back together again, and as you can see, the lid is completely flush with the top of the barrel. The tolerances there are pretty fine on any watch, so you need to make sure that when you put the barrel lid back on, that everything is in line. Let's move on. So guys, you just have to make absolutely sure before you torque up the screws on the train bridge, which is this component here, and this screw here, and this screw here. Just have to make sure that the train is all seated properly. It's a little bit tricky because you've got 8 pivots to get in place. You've got 4 at the top and 4 at the bottom. So yeah, you need to make sure that is good before you tighten those screws, or you'll break off a pivot and you are in with a Rolex in a world of expensive hurt. So moving forward a few hours work on this watch, and as you can see, we have a very shiny Rolex 3035 movement, still on the movement holder but on the time grapher, because I've just actually put it in beat. Let's actually have a little look at how nice and shiny this movement now is, and then just come out and look at the time grapher. And I have just put the watch in beat. I haven't done anything about the timing of it yet, because I wouldn't normally do that for about 48 hours, because you have to let all the lubricants kind of find their way around the different parts of the movement. The amplitude is already up by 20 degrees, and I would expect that to rise over the next 48 hours, after which I will finish the timing on this particular watch with the microstellar wrench on the little timing screws there. But what I'm pleased about is the fact, in fact you can see the amplitude rising there now. What I am pleased about is, since I put this watch in beat, it has not deviated for one beat from being completely in beat. The watch is running like it's on rails. The amplitude is rising even as I speak. as all the lubricant sort of finds its way around the movement there. So in a minute we are going to pressure test the case down to 60 meters of water pressure. So to make sure it holds out the water, I have replaced the gaskets, and there's 3 of them if you remember. There's the one on the case back there, and you can see just around it there's a very little amount of this sealing grease for rings and gaskets. And you don't want to go too heavy on this, but a little bit of that on there. And also, let me come in a bit closer now. You can see that if I can get it in focus there, the pendant tube is nicely cleaned, and there is a new O-ring on that, and likewise on the, coming even closer, on the crown there. Now I've kept that one deliberately up. It's not deformed like the old one, it's a proper O-ring, and I've got to push that down flush with the inside of the top of the crown in a moment. Then we put the whole case together and put it in the pressure tester, which is fun. So let's have a go at that. And here we go. I have pumped up the pressure testing tank to 60 meters worth of water pressure. So the air pressure inside the little air pocket at the top there is at 60 meters worth of water pressure. Now, if there is any compromise to the case, then inside the case will not be atmospheric pressure as it went in there. It will also be at 60 meters worth of water pressure. So what we're going to do is we're going to drop the watch down into the water and then let out the air in the pocket at the top. Now, when we do that, if inside the watch it has been pressurized to 60 meters worth of water pressure, you will see a lot of bubbles flying out. And if you've watched my video on the Vostok amphibian, at the start of that, I show what happens when it goes badly wrong. But in this case, we are looking at a Rolex Submariner with new seals and with some nice silicone grease on those seals. So everything should be fine. What could possibly go wrong? So just going to come out here now and drop the watch carefully down into the water. Just pushing that down in there now and locking it out. Okay, so what we've got to do now is, as I say, we're going to let out the air really carefully, under control. It's sometimes a little bit tricky to do that, and what we're looking for is any significant amount of bubbles in a sustained way. You might see the odd bubble. There might be trapped air in, where the spring bars go, or just, around the bezel, although there's not much room in here for any trapped air. So let's let go of the air now, really gently if we can do that. Sometimes it comes out in a bit of a rush, and let's see if this Submariner actually is a Submariner down to 60 meters. So here we go. Okay, and we have a few bits of air coming out there, but nothing very significant. So guys, I would say that, just looking at this, let's give it a little. This, I would say, just watching that settle down now, just to make absolutely sure. Guys, if it was compromised, there would be an almighty amount of air coming out. I'm just checking these little bits, but that all seems to have calmed down. So, bearing in mind that, you know, we had a lot of air pressure going into this in that air pocket, and this all looks to have settled down nicely. Guys, I would say that this watch is good down to 60 meters. So let's get the bezel back on, let's get the automatic works back on the movement, and let's get this watch finished up. So guys, just to finish this video then with a final shot of the watch underwater, and the whole point of this video is to show through proper servicing of both the movement and the case that you can keep real life in these beautiful old vintage Rolex watches, because, you know, these watches are extremely high quality and they were really made to last. I'm just finishing now with a shot of the watch as it came out of the rock pool, baking in the sun there. And, you know, watches, guys, do not come more classic than this. I absolutely love this watch, and I also absolutely love the, you know, one of the watches that came after it. And if you watch my video on the Submariner 16613, which of course has the 3135 movement, which is, you know, arguably a nicer movement than the one inside this watch. Both of these watches are really gorgeous. If I only had one lot of £7,000 to spend on either of these, guys, if I'm honest, I would go, as I said with my former video, with the 16610 or 13, depending on what color you want, because at the end of the day, the 3135 movement is a superior movement in my view, as a guy that fixes, you know, and maintains these movements. So guys, if you like my videos, then please subscribe, please hit the bell, because I'm making a lot of content at the moment, not only about Rolex but also, you know, more what's that awful word, affordable watches, because we love it all. And also pocket watches, I do a lot of pocket watches as well. But guys, from Pembroke Dock here on the coastline in Wales, that is all I've got for you for the moment. So cheerio and God bless.